and welcome to Transforming Language Education, the vodcast series where we will talk about the future of teaching, inquiry, and advocacy in language education. I'm Jen Crawford.
And I'm Rob Philback. Please like or subscribe if you want to join us in helping to transform language education.
All right. Well, welcome everyone. We're so happy to be here with you today. And today we have Dr. Emmy Men, who's going to be our guest. We're so excited to be speaking with her. Dr. Emmy Men is an expert in language education with a focus on teaching strategies and approaches. She has been invited to be a keynote speaker to discuss TESOL teaching practices with equity, diversity, and inclusion. She has published many articles and book chapters on teaching languages and assessing student performance, and is invited frequently to give talks, webinars, and workshops. Through her teaching service and practice, she strives to empower teachers and teacher candidates to be the change agents committed to urban and global education through language education, and help teachers and teacher candidates gain deeper insight into individual, cultural, and international contexts of diversity and language as a system. Before coming to USC, Dr. Men was an instructor at the University of California, Riverside, prior to which she taught at Kyunghee University in Korea. Before her career in higher education, Dr. Men taught English to speakers of other languages in both national and international contexts for over 10 years. Dr. Men earned her PhD in education from the University of California, Riverside, with her specialization in curriculum and instruction. Her MA was in communication management from the University of Southern California, and her BA in social science from the University of California, Irvine. Welcome, Dr. Men.
Thank you so much, Dr. Men. It's such a pleasure. That's such a rare opportunity to be able to interview and talk with someone who exemplifies in her everyday teaching practice and scholarly work the values of diversity, equity, and inclusion, as well as authentic care for her students. So I want to start us off talking a little bit about your scholarship, particularly Dr. Emmy Men's scholarship on equitable assessment in language education. I believe improves language curriculum and instruction in the field of TESOL and also in the USC MAT TESOL program. So I wanted to start there with equitable assessment. Can you tell us a little bit more about your equity-minded assessment model for TESOL?
Hello, everybody, and thank you for having me. I'm honored to be here. Yes, the EMAM framework or equity-minded assessment model. And in that model that I introduced 6 principles, and some of them are really very commonly known in the world of assessment, but I build on those concepts to come up with a new lens called equity lens, and to try to view at these different principles. So first principle is validity. And as we know, validity is a degree to which an assessment measures what it intends to measure. And reliability, it has to do with consistency and dependability of an assessment. Practicality, and measures whether the assessment uses given resources and time that is allotted. And also authenticity is whether or not the assessment is authentic. And here we're talking about not only whether or not the assessment is authentic to the test designers, but also whether or not it is authentic to the students or test takers who are taking the assessments. And washback, which might be a new concept to some of the listeners here, and the washback is defined as any influence that assessment has on teaching and learning. So we're talking about micro level consequences, and also we're talking about macro consequences that an assessment could have on teaching and learning overall. And last but not least, and I've added the lens of equity, try to see we can measure the effectiveness of assessment using the lens of equity as well. So that consists of six principles, and then makes up equity-minded assessment model.
So I have a question. I have a student currently that came as a newcomer, as a teen. And, she talks about how she was given these language assessments when she came to the US, but she knew the content, but because of the language barrier and the fact that her proficiency wasn't quite what she had wanted to be, she was placed in lower level courses, and she was oftentimes identified as English learner and blocked from taking courses that maybe she should have been able to take through at a higher level of content. And I just wonder, where does that fit in? Because that almost sounds like in your framework, I know you talk about impact validity or consequence validity, and it almost sounds like something along those lines of what impact do these assessments, when they're not properly given, what impact do they have on real lives of our students?
So as a classroom teacher, I mean, we're kind of like restricted on what we can do outside of the classroom. But then again, it makes a huge difference whether or not that we as a teachers understand some of the bigger consequences that could happen as a result of assessment that we give in class, and some of the higher stake testing or assessments that could have impact on the students that we teach. And we as a teachers need to understand some of the major consequences and try to mitigate the negative consequences as much as possible, and also try to maximize, positive consequences. So, for example, I mean, a lot of these high stake testing, I mean, has a gatekeeping role. I mean, just like what you said, that some of these students have a limited access to certain resources or certain programs and opportunities because of the results that the assessments tell the administrators, for example. So knowing different consequences that an assessment could have on the students' opportunities and the possible outcome of this in a bigger scheme of things, and that makes a huge difference. So for example, I would say like providing a sufficient support, to these students, and for example, using a variety of different assessments. So not just using one type of assessment to try to make a decision, but trying to collect data from a variety of students' samples and in terms of their work or assessments, artifacts, and observations, qualitative or quantitative assessment results, and collecting data not just about the student alone, but a group that student belongs to, like the students coming from a lower socioeconomic status, for example. There are specific resources that student might need to tap on that you as a teacher might be able to give more support on. And students coming from a specific language background, for example, students coming from a Spanish speaking background, you might be able to provide support that might be needed for them to learn English language that might be specific to that group of students. So knowing those a different resource, and first of all, getting to know the students. We talk about it a lot, but in assessment, there's it's not an exception that we need to get to know the needs of the students, the groups, collective needs of the groups of students to try to help those students to get the positive consequences as much as possible.
Yeah, Rob, what strikes me about Dr. Min's work that I think is so extraordinary is there is a very long history of talking about assessment in language education in the field of TESOL. But I think what you do particularly well is bring this sixth principle of equity to bear on that. And I was wondering if you could not only talk a little bit more about what are some of the most important aspects of that sixth principle, but also tell me if you've seen teachers that you've been working with in the field or as working with pre-service teachers, how they've taken that sixth principle and really changed the way they've done assessments in TESOL or language education. You gave us some general examples about things we should be thinking about, but I'm wondering if any of your past teachers or current teachers who are preparing to go out into the classroom, how they've enacted that in their practice.
Yes, and students often come to me and say that this framework, I mean, we're saying this framework, and we don't want to just say this is checklist, that they need to just, check off the list and think that they have effective assessment, but this has really, according to some of my students, really broadened their scope on what makes a good and effective assessment. So, for example, some of the students, they were using their own preconceived notions of what makes a good assessment, but now they have a construct to run it by when they are creating or administering assessments, and they are using evidence-based practices. This is very, very important. So they're not only are they trying to collect data from the students themselves, but also they're also trying to do research or collect statistical data about the specific needs of those students when they're designing and administering these assessments. So this has been a really impactful in that regard, because these teachers are actually collecting data to get to know their students and trying to create a good assessment, and also using a specific guidelines such as a rubric or checklist, or some examples. When they're using it, they are making sure that those examples they use are culturally responsive, and some of those instructions that they use when they're giving assessments, and it is done in a way that's clear, and they use multilingual strategies to make sure that all the students are on the same page, and they're making sure that they go over the assessments afterwards, and also taking into the consideration of the students' perspectives after that they have given the assessment. This has given a new insight into what the teachers can learn about the assessments, not just about the design and administration of it, but also understanding the impact of assessment by evaluating the results of the assessments and getting the perspectives from their own students. Mm-hmm.
It sounds like the picture I'm getting too is, a lot of, for example, our candidates in our program, but I know teachers all over the world have situations where they can't change the assessment. Like you said earlier, there are standardized assessments that they sort of have to follow. But the picture I'm getting is they could have lots of different ways to kind of augment or support or do things in addition to that to get a richer and fuller picture of who their students really are, what the learning really is, and that could be a really interesting way to not feel like you're just subject to, whatever standardized assessments are in place in your context.
Mm-hmm. So I know that we're all bound by some kind of restrictions, and especially as a classroom teachers, we can make a difference within our classrooms, but there's sometimes, there are issues that we cannot really change just in a short term. So there are some ways, and definitely you can do as classroom teachers to still try to make that positive impact and make a difference within the classroom. So for example, like providing a rubric that is, and sharing that rubric. And sometimes a lot of times I encourage teachers to co-construct rubric and grading criteria with your students. You'll be amazed how hard your students are on themselves when they're creating rubric, and they not only come up with a very stringent requirements, but they also remember those requirements, and they understand what is expected of them when they are taking the exams or assessments, and this has been a positive learning and teaching experience. And oftentimes we think of assessment as as an anxiety-provoking instance, and it is isolated from teaching. But it is important for teachers to realize that assessment needs to be integrated with teaching, and it could be done in a way that's conducive to what we call a positive watchback function, in which we give feedback to our students based on the results of the assessments, and we listen to students' feedback, and this could be a really positive experience for all.
This makes me think of something that our dean here at the USC School of Education mentioned in one of his past master classes, and he quoted Paulo Freire, and what he said, and I'm paraphrasing this here, is it's teachers' job to prepare students for the world as it is and to prepare them for the world as it should be. And it, Dr. Min, it makes me think a lot about your work as we prepare students to pass these standardized assessments that serve as gatekeepers to continue down the educational pipeline and avail oneself of professional and academic opportunities, as well as how we can think about using assessments to prepare students for the world as it should be, solving social issues and problems, applying what they learn in the class to come up with innovative, real world, real-time solutions that use multiple languages in meaningful ways. So I was wondering if you could talk a little bit about that, because what you just said reminded me of it. If you can think of any examples of how some of your past teachers or current teachers are using assessment or thinking about assessments in ways that support students to achieve their academic and professional goals, as well as to make positive, equitable social change in the world using their plurilingual set of skills or their linguistic repertoires.
Yes. So, some of my teachers that I work with, and they are sometimes grapple with the term teach to the test. And we talk about in our class, I mean, is it conducive to positive watchback, or is it negative, and we have, debate or discussion around that topic. And definitely we can say if we have extensive teaching going on that, has to do with teach to test, and it might be negative, because if we don't want the assessment to drive teaching for the most part. But however, we talk about how sometimes having assessment as a guide would be helpful, because a lot of times assessment results, just like what we said, has to do with the decision making, and students need to know how powerful assessment could be on their future and future goals and careers. So I think that it is crucial for teachers to understand and also make it explicit to their students some of the possible consequences that could arise as a result of the assessments that they take. Or maybe we can have some critical discussions with our students with regard to assessment and what it does. I mean, is there anything we can do to change it? Sometimes we have to align our teaching with the goal of the assessments, because those are the measures that we're using in our real world to assess students' skills, and that has a lot to do with their future career trajectories and whatnot. So I think making it transparent and making it explicit and making assessments as a guide for teaching, I think to some extent is beneficial. And as long as we introduce it in such a way that the assessment will have impact on their future, but we want to make sure that our students bring with them their critical lenses and perspectives, so that they can also show or demonstrate their abilities in different ways.
This has been such a fantastic, thank you for helping us think about assessments. Thank you, Dr. Min, because you have, across my own development and learning, have shaped the way I've thought about the role of assessments. And I think you're a leader in the field when we talk about more equitable assessments. So it's been a pleasure to have you with us today. And thanks for helping us think of both practical and conceptual ways to conceptualize equitable assessment in TESOL. If you're interested in learning more, we will also share links to one of Dr. Min's latest chapters around equitable assessment in TESOL. Thank you very much, Dr. Min.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.